Our first question today is, how can I create the time in my daily routine for prayer?
The first thing I want to say, the question is the right question. How do I create? Sometimes we ask, how do I find time? And it's hard to find time. There's a finite amount of time, and it's just how it is. And nobody, I think the next thing to say is nobody is going to give you time for that. It is something literally we need to make a decision about how we want to structure our days and our lives, so prayer is included. The difficult thing, which we sometimes forget, is we can't just stuff something extra into our lives without losing something else. And so if I want to have time for prayer, that means I can't be doing something else at that time, such as, answering email or sleeping, for example. And so it is about ultimately making choices. When our kids were very young, I found it very difficult to have quiet to pray. And that's, I think, probably when I became an uber morning person, because I got up very early in the morning, because that's when the place was quiet. It did mean that I couldn't sleep in. It did mean that I had to sacrifice that reality. It also meant that I wasn't much fun after 9 p.m. at night. But it created space in my life. I made the space in my life to spend some time with prayer. And that's really the only answer. And so you sometimes just have to make choices and decisions about what's important and what you want to prioritize. And I would suggest that prioritizing time for prayer and seeking the Lord and being in His presence is one of the most important things that we can do. It is not by any means the most urgent thing that is in front of us. God will never be screaming at us, you must come to prayer. But everything else will be screaming at you, you must do this, you must do that, you must do the other thing. And it is about making the hard choices about, no, I am going to take and spend this time. And what becomes, and it takes a long time to create rhythms and habits like that, but when it becomes a habit, it is a welcome reality in our lives, which it is often for me when I get up in the morning. In fact, just this morning I was just grateful to have the quiet, to be reading the scriptures and to be trying to listen to God in that time. So yeah, you got to make the time.
Our second question is, what can I do when my daily devotion time starts to feel more like a burden than a joy?
The first thing is, I do think we have unrealistic expectations about what morning devotions are supposed to be like. I think most of us think or hope that every morning I'm going to get up and have this fantastic experience in the Word and have this visitation from God and have everything I need for the rest of the day. And frankly, as human people who are mutable and changeable, that expectation is unrealistic. We're going to have good days, we're going to have bad days, there are going to be days when it does feel like a chore and a burden. There are going to be days when we are at prayer and we're going to get, quote unquote, nothing out of it. But ultimately, that's not the point. It's never the point. It is my conviction that our task and our job is to create space in our lives, either during our devotions and in other ways, for God to meet us. We create the space. God then meets us in the way that He wants to meet us. So He may just want us to have a quiet morning that there's not much going on. We may be struggling. We may not have the capacity because we're stressed or whatever. We may not have the capacity to be connected to Him like we would like to be. That doesn't matter. We are changeable. He is not. So our task around this is, when it's not meaningful and helpful, part of it is we just need to stick at it and have that right expectation. It's not going to be fantastic every day. The second thing, which is also important, is sometimes it's important to do something slightly different. Where we've gotten into a particular pattern, there are times when if we take a break from that pattern, there's an opportunity for God to refresh us. I have for many, many years had the sense of doing the morning prayer, the office every morning, and it is my standard reality. But a couple of years ago, when I was living in Chicago, it was almost an inspiration from the Lord, but the Lord sort of prompted me to go for a walk. And I'm not a walker. I like to run. Walking is too slow for me. But I started this rhythm of getting up in the morning and taking probably a 45-minute walk, listening sometimes to Pray As You Go, which is a little app that you can have, and some worship music as I was walking through the fields, and it was and the parks around me, and it was a break of my usual routine, and it refreshed that moment. So now I have come back. I don't do that same walk anymore. I've come back to the daily office, but there are sometimes important times or realities where we need to sort of shift and change what we're doing to bring a freshness to it for us. So I think those are the two things that are really important, is to recognize that sometimes it's going to feel tedious. Oh well. And sometimes it's important to break it up and do something slightly different.